Hey there, guys. Welcome to today's live stream. So, as far as anything that needs to be discussed, I do want to mention that in the next couple weeks, I will be starting to do more exercise-based live streams, which I'm going to start out on Instagram, and then I may progress to doing them on Facebook, depending on how it works and how successful they are. But likely the first live stream that I'll do where I'm doing exercises is going to be basically focusing on static stretches to start out, just demonstrating different types of stretches. That's what I'll start out with when I get that going. So it's something that I want you guys to sort of keep in mind that here in the next week, and I will be starting to do those. I'm just trying to wait till it kind of slows down here because here at the house, um, we've been dealing with a lot of, renovating stuff and things of that nature. So there's not really any space for me to be able to do these types of things. So I will be doing those here in the next couple of weeks, more exercise-based live streams. Um, and again, on these presentations, I'm going to explain a little bit more on specific exercises as well. So I just want to sort of reiterate that I'm working on making some changes to my live streams to make them a little bit more engaging. So that's something to keep in mind. My Instagram live streams, I've been doing them roughly at around 10 a.m. on Tuesdays, and then these will stay the same for 12 p.m. on Wednesdays. So that's all I wanted to say beforehand, that I will be starting to do more exercise-based live streams here pretty soon. So thank you guys for sort of sticking with me and watching these, and I hope that you're really finding value in these when I do these live streams discussing various topics, whether it be related to fitness, nutrition, things of that nature. So I hope that it's helping. And again, before I get started here, if there's any feedback that you have, feel free to let me know. And I would be willing to sort of make changes as I go. So thank you guys again for taking the time to watch these. Let's go ahead and get started with today's live stream, which is going to be about plyometric training and whether you should implement plyometric training into your workout regimen. So let's go ahead and get started with defining what plyometric training is. Plyometric training is defined as an exercises that generate powerful movements involving an explosive concentric muscle contraction preceded by eccentric muscle contraction. And I'll explain a little bit further what that exactly means. But versus a lot of the other exercises that I sort of discussed, whether it be core training, resistance training, um, stretches, anything like that, these are more about power and more about basically excuse me, basically about agility and speed. So there's a little bit of a difference with plyometric training when it comes to how the exercises are structured. They're more fast paced than, your typical resistance training exercise or, your core exercises, where these sort of involve more explosive movements. So that's something to keep in mind. And especially if you're wanting to implement these into your workout routine, there are a ton of benefits with these exercises, much like any other exercise. But when you do try to implement them and you are starting out, basically you want to start out with exercises that's easy for you to perform, because a lot of exercises require a lot of different movements when it comes to plyometric training. So again, it's all about generating quick, powerful movements involving that explosive concentric muscle contraction as well as eccentric muscle contraction. So these types of explosive muscular contractions can be seen in practical instances such as rebounding a basketball. Trained basketball players prepare to jump off for a loose ball by lowering their body slightly by flexing at the ankles and the knees and hips. So this is that eccentric loading. So again, a lot of these exercises are more focused on I would say more performance-based goals is where I would mainly categorize the types of exercises. So, the importance of plyometric training. Plyometric exercises help increase that rate of force production and motor unit recruitment. These exercises are a progression that can be incorporated to overall strength base, proper core stability, as well as balance capabilities. So, I just discussed a little bit that they're about this concentric and eccentric. So I do want to sort of explain exactly what that is. Um, so basically, this is sort of the phases that you go through when you're going into a plyometric sort of workout. So there's an eccentric phase that you go through, amortization phase, and a concentric phase. So these are pretty much self-explanatory when I get basically breaking down what they mean. So the eccentric phase is the phase that can be classified as the deceleration-like phase or described as the preloading phase and stretching of the agonist muscle. So basically this, for example, like if you were doing like a box jump up, which is where you would jump up basically on a higher platform and then likely jumping down, what you're doing there before you're starting that jump, you're loading your muscle. So that's that basically that eccentric phase that you're starting out. You're getting that muscle ready, loading that muscle. So the amortization phase is the phase that can be referred to as the transition phase, which is represented by the time between eccentric and concentric phases. So this amortization phase is that phase between these two. So it's that phase after you've loaded that muscle, you're going into that amortization phase. Concentric is the ending phase where the elastic energy is released, which involves the shortening of the agonist muscle. So basically, this is just showing you the different points that you're going through when you're performing an eccentric exercise, or excuse me, plyometric exercise. So eccentric is the deceleration-like phase, which is preloading that muscle. The agonist muscle is the primary muscle that's being used to perform that action. The amortization phase, again, is that transition. Your concentric phase is when that energy is released and that agonist muscle is shortened. So you're going to elongate that primary muscle when you're going through the eccentric phase, and then when you're going to that concentric phase, you're shortening that muscle, which is releasing that energy. So that's something to keep in mind. That's basically how basically these exercises are sort of structured. They go through three different phases when you're performing them. So like again with a box jump up, your eccentric is loading, you're going to the amortization phase, concentric is releasing that energy, and you're landing on top of that box. So another thing that's related to sort of an expansion on this concentric eccentric amortization is the stretch shortening cycle. This is basically the loading of a muscle eccentrically to prepare it for rapid concentric contraction. So this is somewhat basically explaining a little bit more into detail what I just discussed. So step one is that stored elastic energy is stimulated of muscle spindles and the signal is sent to the spinal cord. So when you're starting out, that elastic energy is stored and then that signal is sent for you to prepare for that particular action. The nerves meet the synapse and the spinal cord signal is sent to stretch the muscle. So this is basically explaining a little bit more into detail how your body is reacting when you're doing these exercises. Step three is the elastic energy is released, enhancing muscle force production. So this is basically just telling you how your muscles are reacting, how your body is reacting to performing this exercise. That stored elastic energy is basically sending a signal to the spinal cord, letting it know to prepare for an exercise. The nerves meet the synapse in the spinal cord. The signal is sent to the stretched muscle. That muscle is stretching, and then that elastic energy is released, creating that muscle force production. So that's basically sort of describing the steps that the body goes through to perform these muscle actions. So there's various different types of plyometric exercises, and I've got an example of basically how you perform each of these. Each of what is shown is the specific steps of what you go through. There's so many different exercises when it comes to this. I've done many of these exercises. I enjoy doing plyometric exercises. They can be they can take a little bit more energy than most exercises because you're performing such quick movements, but there's a lot of benefits to them. So you have a squat jump, a multiplanar jump, a lunge jump, a tuck jump. You have a multiplanar jump down with stabilization. You have multiplanar jump with stabilization, as well as a power step up here. So again, you guys can go back through this live stream and sort of look at these and sort of see how they're performed and sort of try these out. They're pretty self-explanatory, I would say. Squat jump, you're basically, like I just mentioned, you're loading that muscle. You're going down into a squat, and then you're doing an explosive jump, and then you're landing back down. Same with a multiplanar jump. You're basically loading that muscle, you're jumping, and then you're landing sta at a stable, basically stable on the floor when you're doing the jump, and you're just going to sort of repeat that as many reps that is required depending on your goals. Same with the lunge jump. You're preparing that muscle. A lot of these have the same similar sort of starting position. You're preparing that muscle with that lunge, and then you're doing that explosive jump, and then you're landing back down. Same thing with the tuck jump. You're basically loading that muscle again, and then you're explosively coming back up, but you're keeping your knees in when you're doing a tuck jump. So all of these kind of have a similar structure if you kind of look at them basically from what I just discussed when we're talking about eccentric, amortization, concentric. They're going through each of these phases. Same thing when you talk about the multiplayer jump down with stabilization. Again, he's on top of the box, he's loading that muscle, and then he's jumping down off the box and landing flat on his feet. So the same with the multiplanar jumps are basically jumping in various different planes of motion. That's what it means when it relates to multiplanar. So he's jumping basically to the left, he's jumping to the front, and then he's doing a rotation. So that's basically what that multiplanar jump down with stabilization sort of means. And when it's talking about multiplanar jump with stabilization, that means basically landing stably at the end of the exercise. So you're preparing that muscle, doing that specific jump, landing, and then with the multiplanar jump, you're of course moving to a different type of motion. The power step up, same thing. She's sort of loading that muscle, she's jumping, and then she's basically performing almost somewhat like a lunge, but you're doing a step up. So it's more of a rapid sort of lunge, I guess you would say, more just a step up rather than a lunge, but it's more of a faster paced motion. So again, you're sort of seeing that all of these exercises have that loading. They have that loading phase starting out, which is the eccentric, the amortization, which is the between phase, and the concentric, releasing that muscle force production, and their landing. So that's something to keep in mind. All of these have the same sort of structure. Preparing that muscle, jumping, landing. So that's something to sort of keep in mind when you're looking at each of these exercises. So designing a plyometric training program. So implementing plyometric training exercises into a program depends on three different factors, and they are known as intensity, volume, training frequency, and or load. So like I just mentioned, a lot of these exercises are going to be dependent on your goals. And like what I had mentioned before, especially when you're starting out, you want to start with exercises that you're comfortable with doing. That's at a lower intensity, not too powerful. Of course, these are quick movements, but you want to do a particular exercise that's, basically easier to start out with than something that maybe like a multiplanar jump, that would be a little bit too advanced to start out with. Maybe anything like a tuck jump or a squat jump would be something that I would say would be a great beginner exercise. because you're not sort of doing too many different changes in motion with a multiplanar jump. You're just performing one specific cycle of motions. So that's something to keep in mind is start with something that you're comfortable with doing that you can easily translate. So again, I just sort of want to reiterate that because that's important, especially when you're starting out with these types of exercises. So when we're talking about intensity, plyometric intensity is described as the distance covered and the amount of effort or stress that is applied to the muscle and connective tissue as well as the joints. So this is just telling you how much stress is applied to that muscle. Different exercises require different intensities based on your various goals. Volume, when it comes to plyometric volume, that is expressed in the amount of times of the number of foot contacts, throws, and catches during the exercise. So, for example, basically the volume, like for if you were doing like a squat jump, how many times you're doing that, going through that sort of cycle of jumps is basically the volume of that specific exercise. Training frequency can be determined by described or be described as your current fitness level, current training program, and or your injury history as well as your specific training goals. So for example, asking yourself if plyometric training exercise is relevant to your goals, that's something to keep in mind. Again, like I mentioned, when it comes to plyometric exercises, it's all about these powerful, quick movements. So if that's something that you're wanting to sort of enhance your performance, enhance your speed and agility, then plyometric exercises are a great way to go. Like I said, it depends on your goals. If that's something that you sort of want to pursue and you want to get more performance, then definitely add it into your workout routine. But like it relates to talking about this training frequency, like I've sort of mentioned when you're starting out beginner, understand your current fitness level, where you're at the moment. Understand your injury history. If you have any certain leg injuries, or if you've previously had any certain leg injuries, I guess I should say, then that's something you want to keep in mind if you're wanting to sort of implement plyometric training. Again, like if I was to sort of assign this to a client, I would assign it to an individual who is focusing on performance-based goals. Um, if you're in sports, this would be definitely a good sort of training program to go into or to implement, I guess I should say. So that's something that I wanted to discuss. Just be aware of sort of your current fitness level, your goals, your injury history, and just ask yourself if it's relevant to your goals. So that's pretty much all I have to discuss today, guys. I hope that you found some value in this. Again, plyometric training, I've done it myself. I enjoy it. It does provide a little bit more of a challenge. And I like cardio exercise is one of my favorite types of exercises to do. I don't do it as much anymore because it's not as relevant to my goals. I do sometimes implement it though. Cardio exercise is good, and like especially if you're doing like more for muscle gain. If you do it in small increments, it's fine. But then if you're doing too much, you're burning too much calories, and you're sort of not giving your muscles enough to sort of repair. So those calories are going away. So when it comes to muscle gain, that's not really relevant. Like I just mentioned, it's not really relevant to my goals as much. So it needs to be in a smaller increment. Same can be said with plyometric training. It is more in line with cardio in a sense, but it is separate exercises that you're doing. So again, these are all about explosive movements, explosive patterns. Um, there's many progressions that you can do with each of these exercises, like the multiplanar jumps. But when you're starting out, you want to start with like tuck jumps or squat jumps. Lunge jumps would even be a good idea as well. So that's something to keep in mind that there's so many things that you can do with plyometric exercises. And they have a lot of health benefits because, like with cardio as well, that's something, cardio helps with cardiovascular health. Plyometric training does sort of the same sort of thing where it's focusing on sort of raising your heart rate and things of that nature. So No, I'm sort of going a little bit far off there, but I hope that you guys found some value in this, and I hope that it makes you think. With me, with my type of exercise training, I like to have some challenge. I like sort of the stabilization sort of stuff. Anything that's challenging my stability, I like. And again, that helps with other things. So if you're focusing on performance, it would be best to sort of implement plyometric training because it's going to help you challenge your performance. It's going to help better your performance. So think about that too when you're deciding on that specific sort of training program or any training exercises. So that's all I want to discuss today, guys. I hope that you found it helpful. If you have any questions, you can feel free to uh, text me with my phone number that's provided below. Let me know that's you and let me know what your question is. You can also send an email to me as well with my email to the right. So that's all I have for you guys today. Again, I will have more live streams coming. I will be doing more exercise-based live streams, sort of explaining specific exercises. And I'm hoping that these give you guys a little bit more value, giving you sort of a visual representation of how to perform specific exercises. So I'm really looking forward to doing those and sharing with you guys some more information and things that you can take with you and sort of think about. So thank you guys for watching. I will have another live stream next Wednesday. I'm going to be talking about sort of the influences of weight gain. That's the next live stream I'll be discussing. There's going to be a lot of great information in that as well. So definitely watch out for that live stream. It'll be at the same time at 12 p.m. likely. So I will see you guys next time in the next live stream.